Hello, students. Today we're going to be discussing Chapter 11 in your textbook, which is the Roaring Twenties, or the 1920s, and we're going to be covering the years 1919 to 1929. Now, the Roaring Twenties was known as the Roaring Twenties in part because of the booming economy we had throughout the decade. After World War I, our economy grew greatly. Using mass production, American workers produced more goods in less time than ever before. So our production per person per hour was in excess of virtually any other country in the world. A big reason for this is the automobile. The 1920s was known as the decade of prosperity, again, due to our great economic conditions, which was in turn due to, in large part, the automobile. Henry Ford essentially revolutionized working life in America, and not only working life, but revolutionized life in America in many different ways, and we're going to discuss those as we move forward. Here is a picture of an early Ford Model T. Notice that the design is very similar to that of a carriage that would have been horse-drawn. The reason being because that's the only thing Henry Ford had to model off of was a carriage. So we see the early style of the automobile in that the style of a carriage, and we'll see that morph and change obviously over time. We'll talk about mass production. It was not invented by Henry Ford, but it was definitely pioneered by Henry Ford in the auto industry. The definition is there, the rapid manufacture of large numbers of the same product, and using this, Henry Ford could make many cars very rapidly and cheaply. So therefore, the Model T was affordable to the common man. Now, not only did he do that, but Henry Ford, on the other end of it, did some very great things for his workers, which we'll talk about in a second. The Ford Model T at one point cost $850, which, of course, was more then than it is now, but was still very affordable to the common man. It came only in black because black paint dried faster, and he could produce cars more quickly that way. The factory is located in Detroit, Michigan, which even today is the center of the auto industry. Using the assembly line system, Henry Ford could mass produce his Model Ts. At each step, a worker stands and places a new item to the car as it moves down the line, and when it ends the line, it's a complete product. At one point, it took only 90 minutes to build a Ford Model T. Ford was great to his workers. One thing he did was offer weekends off. He gave them $5 a day pay, which was double that of most competitors at that time. And he instituted a 40-hour work week in which 50, 60, 70-hour work weeks were common. Henry Ford is essentially responsible for shaping much of our modern life. Now, he did a lot of things that were controversial. For example, he had a wing of his company that was given the task of investigating the social life of his workers, and he would promote those with social lives and moral beliefs that he agreed with, and he would not promote those that he didn't agree with. Here's a picture of Henry Ford. So the automobile changed America in many ways. One thing that it did was it increased the demand for many other industries and products within the United States. Some of those are listed here. Obviously, road construction boomed. Motels were created, or motor hotels. And this, of course, decreased the need for railroads and trolleys as more and more people became automobile owners. Now, automobiles gave us a new sense of freedom and prosperity. You could go out and crank the starting mechanism in the front of the car, hop in and take off for a joyride. You could go on vacation. You could live farther from work than you could before. And so therefore, you didn't have to live in the crowded, sometimes dirty downtown areas. So our economy was basically bustling or booming for three main reasons. Number one was the companies began to make effective use of advertising for the first time in history. They began to use, and still use today, psychology to make people think they, quote unquote, needed new products that were coming out in the 20s, for example, Kleenex and Listerine. So successful advertising convinced people to buy these products. Also, credit became much, much easier to get in the 1920s. A buyer could make a small down payment and pay the rest in installments. This is known as layaway. This is known as installment buying. But this became very prominent in the 1920s, whereas before it was looked on as almost a sin. And even in today's time, it is still very common to buy things on credit. The third reason being a bull market. Now, the bull market is a term for rising stock market prices. The stock market, of course, is the buying and selling of small shares of ownership in large corporations. And prices were basically continually moving upward in the 20s. The next chapter, when we talk about the Great Depression, we'll talk about that coming to an end. Also, buying on margin was practiced. That's where people would borrow money to buy stocks. So they would have to not only make money back to pay the people that lent them the money, but also to make a profit. So very, very risky. Now, cities, suburbs, and country. Nearly everyone is moving out of the country and into the city. The city is where it was happening. New forms of entertainment, new technologies, and so forth. Another America, however, was forming with the poor farmers and the inner city residents. This, again, goes back to our Gilded Age concept from a few chapters before. On the outside, everything looked great, but if you delve deeper, there were some serious, serious economic issues. And that is it for Section 1, Part 1 of our video lesson.